Therapy with Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse, Part 6, 5 Steps to Case Formulation. Well, now we're ready to put it all together. In this video, I'm going to explain how to answer 5 questions about your clients to know how you can best help them reach their goals. First, I'll show you a table that you can use in your own clinical work and apply it to the case of Sarah that I introduced in part 1 of this series. This video is the last in a 6-part series on control mastery theory and how you can learn to apply this approach in your own clinical work. It's, again, a 6-part series that has covered these topics. Part 1 was an overview of control mastery theory. Part 2, we covered the client's goals. Part 3, I addressed the client's pathogenic beliefs. Part 4, the client's key traumas were discussed. And part 5 was about how clients may test pathogenic beliefs. Today, I'll address part 6, 5 steps towards case formulation. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California who specializes in the treatment of survivors of narcissistic abuse. I work from a form of therapy called control mastery theory, which prizes the client's efforts to overcome their own traumas and realize a fuller and richer quality of life for themselves. If this topic interests you, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's titled Effective Therapy with Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse: The Basics of Control Mastery Theory. Okay, let's take a look at the 5 steps towards a case formulation in control mastery theory. Putting it all together. Control mastery theory asks 5 questions designed to understand the client's plan. The plan is actually with a capital P in control mastery theory, and it refers to the 4 topics discussed already in this series. That is, what are the client's goals? What are the beliefs, the pathogenic beliefs that are standing in the way of those goals? What are the key traumas that led to the client adopting those pathogenic beliefs in the first place? And fourth, how might the client work to test those pathogenic beliefs in the therapy so they can disconfirm them and feel freer and safer to reach their goals? So all 4 of those elements are what are considered the client's plan for therapy. And there are essentially 5 questions you can pose and answer as you think about a case to understand the client's plan. And I wanted to walk you through these 5 questions in the case of Sarah, who I introduced in the first video of this series. So the first question in a case formulation is, what are this client's goals for therapy? Well, as we've discussed, Sarah had to abandon her developmentally appropriate goal of thinking about herself and what she wants. And one way of operationalizing that in her life today was if she were to re-engage in an activity such as swimming that she enjoys, and to do that on a regular basis. As I discussed in the video on client goals, it's important to find a sort of concrete goal because it will let you know as a therapist whether the client is moving closer to that. It's observable. It doesn't mean necessarily that swimming, or if Sarah were to engage in swimming by itself, that would cure everything. It more is that engaging in an activity like that would reflect her putting herself first in her life, and engaging in this form of activity is something that's knowable. It's harder to know something like Sarah's putting herself first in her life. Of course, we want to get at that, but it's important to find kind of empirical links to outcomes like that. The second question to ask is, what are the pathogenic beliefs? Sometimes they're conscious, sometimes they're unconscious, that stand in the client's way. And as we've discussed with Sarah, the pathogenic beliefs she held seem to be something like, if she doesn't take responsibility for others' emotional well-being, then they will fall apart or fall into depression. The third question then is, what key traumas gave rise to these pathogenic beliefs? And we know for Sarah that it was her father who was prone to sullen, depressive episodes, and who would only feel better when Sarah was at home and working hard to cheer him up. The fourth question is, how might the client test the pathogenic beliefs out with the therapist? Well, what we can surmise with Sarah, what I put here was, Sarah may see whether the therapist agrees or disagrees with her practice of putting others' needs ahead of her own. And I laid this out in an example in video 5 in how Sarah tested in her therapy. Another way she might test out her pathogenic beliefs with her therapist is to see whether the therapist requires Sarah to take care of the therapist's emotional needs. Does the therapist seem to need her to pay attention to him or to show that she's exceedingly appreciative for his efforts in the therapy sessions? Third, Sarah may see whether the therapist will support her efforts to prioritize her own emotional well-being ahead of others. And that was exemplified in, again, video 5 in this series, where Sarah talked about setting a boundary with her husband that if he didn't seek therapy on his own, she wasn't going to make herself available to talk to him during his bouts of anxiety. To see if the therapist would be affirming of that step or not. And the therapist was, and that seemed to be useful to her. And the fifth question to ask in formulating a case from the control mastery theory perspective is what kinds of therapist interventions or attitudes would be helpful to the client? Well, relative to the ways that Sarah might test, we can look at 3 kinds of therapist interventions or attitudes that might be helpful. So challenging Sarah's assumptions of responsibility for others' emotional health in her life might be useful. Next would be demonstrating in attitude and presence that you, the therapist, are capable of caring for your own needs. And some ways that can show up, it can be ending sessions on time, addressing issues of payment if they come up, basically showing and demonstrating that you are unabashedly taking care of your own needs in the therapy. That can actually serve as an important way for Sarah to know that it's safe and expected for her to care for her own needs. And third is to affirm Sarah's own displays of caring for herself and putting herself first in her life. Well, you of course can take these questions and create an Excel document or sheet and run through these questions with all of your clients, just to kind of give yourself a roadmap for, from at least from a control mastery theory perspective, what this client may be working on and how you can best support their efforts. Well, that concludes this series on control mastery theory. If you found it to be useful, and also if you're interested in treating survivors of narcissistic abuse, then I hope you'll consider looking into my 3-hour course on applying control mastery theory to specifically survivors of narcissistic abuse. I think that this video series is a great foundation from which to engage in the course. And I also am excited about the accompanying private Facebook group where we as helping professionals can come together to talk about what it's like working in this capacity with survivors of narcissistic abuse, sharing ideas about what has proven effective, because I think this is an important area of therapy that deserves attention by professionals. And I think more can be gained by us coming together, and look forward to hopefully making that happen. Well, thank you.